I really like to ask people like which favorite, like which one of the Disney characters is their favorite, and I think it
Mhm.
says a lot, about them because they're all great. But for me, I really love the whole story of the urchin, uh, street urchin finding his way into you know royalty, but having to figure out how to stop pretending and really being himself. And it's just his inner character that kind of shines through in the end. I love that story. Um,
Mhm.
and I also would say if I'm probably more like Captain Hook, though.
Yeah, so why? First person ever to pick a villain.
Yeah, well, you got to be honest. You got to be honest. Yeah, I think I think one, he's a little bit aristocratic, and he's a
Okay.
pirate, so there's a little bit of that the same you know the same kind of uh thing going on there with Aladdin, like he's a thief and all of that. But he's like tormented by uh, a, a clock that has a monster in it, which is like I think the most amazing metaphor for like death and like mortality.
Mhm.
So he's Captain Hook is this like creative guy that plays the piano and is like a little bit aristocratic, but also swashbuckling. But he's tormented by his mortality, and I would say that's probably a similar similar thing to
I think
me.
that's awesome. It's hilarious. Honestly, that's a crossover that I'd love to see. Aladdin versus, Captain
Captain
Hook.
Hook, yeah,
Give him a give him a run for his money
they
there.
could have a good
It's funny
sword
you
fight.
say that. Well, there, yeah. Um, I've never considered what Disney character I'd be. I'm not going to start now because I take forever to think about it. I've usually picked Daniel Jackson from Stargate if I was a character,
Ah,
but I don't exactly
you
know
went real
who
nerdy
my
there.
villain would be. Totally dork. Yeah, dork central. But when it comes to like playing Monopoly, like I'm absolutely vicious and ruthless, and I'll terrify my family,
Wow. Yeah,
in-laws and stuff.
I can
So
see
that's
it.
like the one time I'll like, hey, they never see that hand going into the bank, just fishing stuff out. Okay, welcome everyone to Catholic Authors, the show about fiction for modern Catholic authors. We're talking creed, craft, and co-creation rooted in grit, grace, gods and dragons. I'm your host, Dominic DeSouza, novel lover, all-around creative, founder of Catholic Author. We're here to inspire your faith and your fiction. Today we are joined by Anthony D'Ambrosio. He is the founder of Catholic Creatives, Sherwood Fellows, and the author of Beakle and the Starstone. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, man. That was quite the intro.
So I really want to hear more of, well, let's start with your origin story.
Hmm.
Um, and if we can slip dragons in there at any point, that's always a plus. But what's your origin story, and how did that lead you up to writing Beakle and the Starstone?
Well, I was born during an eclipse when a dragon constellation showed up in the sky and
Instant
swept the
win. There you
stars
go.
from the. Yeah, like getting into revelations here. No, yeah, origin
King
story,
Arthur
origin
and the,
story.
yeah.
Yeah, Pendragon. Um, I'm not sure. Origin of what? Origin of what? Should we
We
take a?
okay. Your backstory.
Okay.
Who is Anthony?
Who is Anthony? Yeah, so grew up Catholic kid, one of five. I have an identical twin brother who beat me out by a minute and got the family name. So I say I'm Anthony the first of my line. I grew up in Texas and was as classic, homeschooled kids are wont to do. I basically was a book addict and just read all the time. But I ended up going to public school in seventh grade, rebelling really hard, getting into punk rock, and deciding that I was going to go to Warped Tour. Then had a conversion senior year through kind of a Steubenville sort of conference, and decided to go to seminary instead, and spent the rest of my adult life. Yeah, really desiring to make the church and the world more beautiful, and to bring God to the world through beauty.
Amazing. And is that where Catholic Creatives came about? And for those who don't know about it, what is it?
Yeah, so Catholic Creatives is a community of filmmakers, designers, entrepreneurs who want to see a new renaissance in the world through beauty and through the Catholic imagination. And I uh, honestly, the origin story for that was I was doing youth ministry and found that um, there was sort of a dour kind of perspective among other Catholic young adults that I was around. We would get together and we would find ourselves really sort of complaining about church politics and talking about the difficulties that we faced as a church. And a lot of times we would center on pieces of our experience as Catholics that were really subpar. You know, for instance, the bulletin or church websites or horrible homilies, etc. And I found myself at the same time working as an intern and ultimately becoming a sales guy and working my way up a digital marketing agency that worked in the startup culture in Dallas. And I was
Mhm.
discovering in the startup culture design thinking, design principles, and just a whole kind of host of mindsets that looked at problems from a very positive point of view, that used processes to look at problems and then come up with solutions that could change those things. And it was a very empowering perspective that I had never really encountered inside of the
Mhm.
Catholic world. And I wanted to. I immediately was like, what could we channel all of this sort of negative energy that kind of is just stirring up in a way that like is a little bit like resentful. Could we take all of that
Mm.
energy and give it a channel towards actually making an impact in the church? And so we asked a bunch of people like, hey, bring an ugly church bulletin and a six-pack. Let's get together and have a party. We'll invite a bunch of UX and UI design professors and have a keg and like turn this into a positive party experience where we're teaching design thinking and fixing the bulletin issue. And though we didn't fix the bulletin issue per se, what we really were finding as we were digging down into a lot of the problems that kind of ended up with bad websites or bad bulletins was just beneath the surface a lot of issues that we really could impact and that we needed a
Mhm.
community in order to impact. And so the community of Catholic Creatives was born, which is online and in regional events, a summit and conference as well. And so
Mhm.
I guess that's the story. It's been going for about 6 years now. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
And then Sherwood Fellows just was a natural outgrowth out of all of that, right?
Yeah, well, Sherwood Fellows was happening at the same time. The truth was that when I when I threw that event, I had recently quit my youth ministry job and was starting Sherwood Fellows, and I really wanted to
Okay.
be around other people who perhaps had started their own things, and I was thirsting in a way personally for community and mentorship in that process of building my own agency and building my own business. So there was a little bit of
Mhm.
a a desire for the community myself. But
Gotcha.
yeah.
Gotcha. Well, cool. So how does somebody who goes through all of that, and
Mhm.
from what I can tell, you're really successful. The stuff Sherwood Fellows does is beautiful. It's a phenomenal website. What was the inspiration for creating a children's book called Beakle and the Starstone?
Well, yeah, through that whole time, I've continued to write stories and poetry. It's a very deep part of my spiritual practice. I very much feel like if I stop writing, that I will stop like being connected to God, or that a lot of that energy perhaps would come out sideways. Um, I heard somebody kind of describe it as like a beaver needing to like chew on something. Like if you stop chewing, the teeth will like whatever get infected. I don't know, but point is like
Dang, I think that is incredibly true.
yeah, yeah. And so um, I could never kind of put down the writing thing, and that's always been a dream for me um, to tell stories. And a lot of the work that we did with Sherwood was doing that, but for other people. Um, but I'll say
Hmm.
that I think working in the church, it's there's a heavy mantle to that, right? Like particularly in work where you're wading into organizational difficulty and trying to help them to kind of find their identity and find their way. You're really having to see behind the scenes and to see how the sausage is made. And there's something. heavy about that. And my company, all of the people in it, we all kind of had that same, like, we're all artists, and we're all people that really desire to make something just absolutely amazing. And it's very hard to do that inside of kind of institutional structures, which we were helping. But for sure, there was
Mhm.
something that I think that was missing in terms of the purity of artistic pursuit. And
Right.
so we decided to give ourselves permission to make our own, make our own project. So we actually all internally kind of like worked on Beakle and the Starstone a little bit as our own kind of playtime together, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And then I launched it sort of myself, but I had written the story, but a lot of the art and a lot of the marketing and of course editing the story, all of that was really a collaboration with my team.
That's awesome. On the website, it's got this cool little line. It says, "For extraordinary families, do not open this book if you would like to live an ordinary life."
Mhm.
Okay, why it's a kid's book? Why has it got this awesome gift wrapping? This headspace around it. What's the story about? It's about the parable. There's a parable you've retold here with some amazing little some art, not little art. It's just stunning art that's in there.
Yeah.
What's the story about? What's the vision for it? It sounds like there's a mission in play.
Yes, very much a mission in play. So I wrote it um, sort of uh, as a gift um, to a family friend, and at the time she was taking care of a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and this was just like kind of a fun thing that I did for like this person's birthday, and it sort of turned into a whole thing. But the story is um, a retelling of the parable of the treasure in the field, but with birds on a jungle island called Falafel Island, and with a magical starstone. But it's generally the same story structure. And as I was meditating on that parable at that time in my life, I was like, man, this parable says so much about sacrifice and about love. And I think that I grew up in a Catholic world. Like, we love the crucifix, right? Like, we love Lent and we love the idea of self sacrifice, but it can look very heavy, and
Yeah.
it's like we kind of glory in the melancholy suffering a little bit, and that can be
Have you seen Spain? I mean, it's a
yes, right.
beautiful thing.
Very,
It's
very intense,
beautiful, of course.
very metal in a lot of ways, but it can be a hard sell for a kid. And honestly, I think that it can um, that
Yeah.
perspective lacks a certain amount of the lightness of God's
Hmm.
of the way that God approaches the burden of
Right.
Christianity, right? So the story of the parable of the treasure in the field of the pearl of great price really presents the sacrifice of the Christian life as this almost like pulling one over on the world, you know? Like this man finds the treasure, and he knows already that it's worth more than everything that he has. So he buries it
Hmm.
and then goes and sells all that he has so he can buy the field. But it he knows the ending. You know, it's like it's
Yeah.
not this suffering, hero that kind of like takes it for the team. It's like he's
He
going to come out on
grinds his
top.
way to the top.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
going to come out on top, and he knows that the whole way through. And so there's something really beautiful about that. So I think that it teaches so much about possessions, about what's important in life when you really dig into the parable. And so that's I guess the underbelly kind of meaning of the story. But of
Mhm.
course, the other part of it is that I think that the best stories are written for both children and adults, and it's not obvious actually
Mhm.
which one it's for. Um,
Right.
and I think that the right now in the children's world, and this isn't a down on authors or any way. There's a reason why it works this way, but you write books for a very specific age group,
Mhm.
and that has to do with like reading levels and amount of time that's spent reading. But there's very few books that are written for families that have a large age range of kids that would want to participate in bedtime. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that what that ends up doing is favoring the youngest child in the family unit, and therefore kind of losing the older kids. Or vice versa. You have the chapter books, like we're going to read The Hobbit together, but you don't have the illustrations, and so the little kids, lose lose attention.
Attention. Yeah.
So I wanted to create a book that like a whole family could read together with a large age range of kids together.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two kind of ideas behind the book.
Yeah, I really want to get into like what was the process, because you said it was kind of a group effort. But I'm actually curious to come back to a point you said about this thing that I grappled with when I was a kid. This feeling of like you said, sneaking one over on the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's like this. Sometimes you find this hilarious sense of sneakiness in the parables and Christ's messages and so on.
Right.
How did you answer that or unpack that or just sort of like, I don't know, resolve that? Because it seems like a negative thing,
right?
But he's doing it. He's not He's not actually cheating somebody out of something. Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there's so much about Jesus's message that is wrapped in mystery. He's like, hey, don't tell anybody else about what you've seen or heard here. There is a sneakiness in a way of you found something precious and now you get to kind of enjoy that. You've learned a secret that few else will learn. I'm not sure exactly why Christ has set the world up that way, but it does seem to be a part of how kids learn, and there has to be an excitement and almost a sense of exclusivity in knowledge, even spiritual knowledge. So in the book, the way that the story works, Beakle is this kind of strange outcast character that discovers the nighttime. All the other Zumbob birds in his tribe want to get up very early to hunt worms, and that's all their life is about. And so they don't ever see the stars, and he sees the stars and decides to stay up late to look at the stars, and ends up finding a shooting star in his chief's field, and he buries it and goes on this long adventure to try and buy the field from his sort of grumpy and very mean chief. And so there's a little mini revolution kind of in the story, and a revolution against materialism. And, at least the Zumbobs are very much like a metaphor for like suburban Texas in a way, like where everybody is just kind of materially chasing the best job and the best like degree and kind of keeping up with the Joneses. So anyway, that's what the secret revolution is about.
Yeah, that's so intriguing. I think a lot of what you're saying resonates with this idea of being a Catholic author, which is kind of what sort of the community we're building. I love talking with folk like yourself. This sense of, we're not in it for the money.
Certainly not.
We're not in it to wish. We're not in it for the sort of evangelizing, because that's a different ministry. It's like, if you're an author, you're here because, yes, you got a message, but you love telling a dang good story. As much as you love sharing it, you love just sort of sitting in it and just being with characters and world building and characterization and stuff like that. And that sense there of having found that pearl of great price and not being able to walk away from it.
And you have to sell
what comes to your mind. Yeah.
The process of writing is very much like that. I mean, I think, Beakle as a character who sees the stars, that's a beautiful, to me, it's a beautiful metaphor for someone who's on a spiritual journey and who is giving up, a material pursuits in order to look at heaven and seek heaven, and in a way that makes him strange to the rest of the world around him. And right. I would say that the writer's pursuit is very much like that. Writers are very eccentric people. Like we are finding this somehow secret, invisible knowledge, vision, imagery that pulls us down into like an inner world, an inner journey that very few other people could see. And then our job is to try and share that with the world in some way, even
Mhm.
though ultimately it's impossible to do. It's like a doomed, a beautifully doomed process, if you will. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I got to ask, is it almost impossible to share because nobody can ever actually see what you see? Um,
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. I mean, I
okay.
think that the artistic process is always like, a
Lost
doomed.
in
Yeah,
transmission.
yeah. You're like seeing
Yeah.
you're seeing something in a glass darkly, and then you're trying to communicate that, and it's like a game of telephone. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can never quite get it exactly the way that you want
Mhm.
it, but you can still make very amazing, beautiful, world-changing things.
Mhm.
So that's why it's beautiful.
Can I ask about your writing process and what that's like? Like, I think you said you write regularly to keep chipping away at the wood.
Hmm. Yeah. So I don't know how other people are. I have recently found that uh, I thought that just being disciplined was the way to do it. Like I could get the most done if I just would wake up early every morning and before work kind of get a few pages done, 500 words or whatever. I tried that for a
Mhm.
very long time, and recently I kind of gave up on that and just started inviting friends to um, Google Hangouts to write with me at 8 a.m. and that way I have accountability. So uh, I generally have like two or three different groups of people that I regularly write with, and for some people, they find these veins of inspiration, and then they dig in and they just kind of strike oil and they dig the well out, and then they don't write for a little while. For me, I don't get inspired until I've started writing. So usually it's like 20 minutes in, things will start
Mhm.
flowing out, and I just have to be willing to kind of sit there for 20 minutes writing things that feel like, sand in my mouth. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, so um, that's a part of it. I write poetry as that's probably the more like spiritual practice side of it than
Mhm.
that becomes that's in a lot of ways like digging out the inner inspiration and perhaps inner mythology. My poetry is like the
Mhm.
Silmarillion, and then
Right.
in these writing groups, I'm actually writing stories or screenplays, etc. So
As a quick aside, and I'll just trim this. When you're talking, there's like some kind of clicking
oh,
that keeps happening. I'm not sure what it is.
uh, is it still clicking right now?
It's
Even
it's better now. Maybe it was just the finger tapping against it or something.
man, this is like a
So
very
okay,
sensitive mic, I guess. Sorry about
I
that.
appreciate you hanging in there and holding it for the duration.
Yeah.
Um, I had a question. It slipped my mind, but it was oh, uh, like you say that process of sitting there for that 20 minutes before hitting that goal. I mean, it's exactly the same thing with almost any spiritual discipline. Contemplation, meditation. You got to sit for the first 20 minutes to kind of calm down, get into a different headspace, actually be able to start listening to things or be able to start paying attention to things, stop worrying about the day. Um,
Hmm.
I think it's one of this is one of the reasons why I'll keep saying I think that being an author who is Catholic, faith inspired fiction, that sort of thing, there's a call to take it much more seriously, maybe, and have a whole lot more fun than a lot of other people who might be in it just to make income or just to keep putting stuff out. Whereas we're in it to dig a little deeper, to sort of pop the hood of creation and try to understand how things work so that when we can go and tell our story, tell our messages, we're sharing something, you know, with a little more richness, a little more depth, but still the intent is to have fun and to tell a story that matters to us, that means something to us. Um, did you have a legend or a story growing up that you like to go back to, you like to think about?
Robin Hood.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can I ask why?
yeah, sure, yeah, sure. I mean, Robin Hood and Aladdin. There's like a lot of crossover,
Yeah.
But I think that um, uh, the story is in a lot of ways like a very Catholic story. Um, there's stories about rebellion, like changing the world, that I would say um, that's a very modern, or yeah, there's a very modern kind of like fascination with
Hmm.
the revolution, right? Um, but
Hmm.
before, in the medieval era, um, this it was like the story of the good king and the story of the good thief. Um, King Arthur
Mm.
and Robin Hood were kind of like they come together, even like in a lot of
That's
books.
true. Yeah.
So you have like the high tale that is like a lot about chivalry and about the king coming into his own and restoring order to the kingdom, and then
Yeah.
you have the story of the good thief living in the this is how you live where the kingdom is a bad kingdom, like when you have a bad king.
Right. Robin Hood is the response to when King Arthur fails.
Right, yeah, or when he hasn't come yet, like in a lot of ways, like he's waiting for King Arthur, right? And I
Yeah.
think that the attitude of that story is, instead of it being like we're going to make a revolution and we're going to whatever, which is pretty much how every
Hmm.
modern movie has like tried to interpret Robin Hood, which just
Yeah.
I hate, because it guts the heart of the myth. Like Robin Hood goes out into the wilderness to create kind of like a Benedict option, like um,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's a little bit like Saint Francis,
Hmm.
in that he's uh, going into an experience of poverty willingly, and doing so in community with other people who like share the same values, and um, he's he'll even catch the bad guys in his grasp, and let them go perhaps with like a third of their treasure, but he'll still even give them their treasure back,
Hmm.
and say, okay, there's a third
Yeah.
for us for this feast that we throw you, and then there's a third for charity, and we're going to give that to the poor, and we're going to give you a third back and send you on your way. So there's this very like playful kind of like, we accept the fact that you have authority and you're a king over us, and we're going to playfully relieve you of some of your treasure, for the sake of justice, but
Hmm.
um, we're still going to kind of
Hmm.
like respect that kind of authority, in a way. So it's yeah, I just
Yeah.
think that it's a very mature way of approaching living in a broken world. Um, yeah,
It's a far more surgical, in a way, surgical response as opposed to a sweeping revolution, like you said, killing the power structures, blowing up everything.
right.
This year's, and then you're right. There's that sense of play
Hmm.
uh, in administering this justice. Maybe a little bit of regret, but it's always around good food and friendships and
Right,
being sneaky and,
right,
but yeah, not trying to destroy everything.
right.
I think that's a beautiful point.
Yeah.
One of the things I loved about him, also there's like this kind of wrestling with the universal destination of goods, right?
Mhm.
That the Holy Fathers talked about more recently. Um, and it seems like the medieval mind kind of wrestling with the sense that you don't have an absolute claim
Mhm.
to all the gold and everything that you have. It belongs to us, and we need to kind of not liberate that, but we need to respect that.
Mhm.
And you know,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
this
intriguing.
sense of like responsibility, um, for the poor, is very, very profound
Hmm.
in that. Um, and it's but it's not like all the rich guys are evil, which is like where
Hmm.
we go as moderns in a lot of ways. So
Hmm.
you have these characters that are like very, very good,
Hmm.
wealthy people that kind of play in the same sandbox as Robin Hood in the myth as well. So there's
Hmm.
so much to sort of to dig into about it. I mean, I built my whole company culture around Robin Hood. I mean, Sherwood Fellows is like a euphemism for the merry men. I just thought it was a little bit more gender neutral, So yeah.
That's awesome. Robin Hood always was one of my favorite stories growing up.
Hmm.
Um, so, what was the writing process like for crafting this? And then you said collaborating with other people. It's kind of a different sort of uh, process than what I'm hearing, as opposed to other people perhaps who've been on the show who have gone and just written the story, partnered with an illustrator, and then perhaps self-published it. Um, this was more of a group effort. So can you share with us what that was like?
Yeah, so I wrote the first draft like many years before we started collaborating on it as a team, and I would say that that's probably a pretty standard thing. I think it would be very hard for me to co-write a story. I'm sure that I could, but coming to the table with a draft, I think was like an important thing to say. Like this is where we're starting, but uh, that draft was, although it had all of the gold that's in it now, it just lacked polish. It lacked there was a few different sort of character arcs that were competing, you know, in the main character, and ways that uh, you know, structurally it was just a little bit bloated in some places and anemic in others. And so we read it together as a team, and then there was probably a year of giving feedback and workshopping it, which um, I would say is pretty. Uh, I don't know anybody else that's like done that kind of level of like revisions to a children's story, and
Mm-hmm.
it probably was just because I was a first time author and had a lot to learn about um, how to polish a story, and you know, it took some major coaxing to let go of some of my darlings, you know. Um, so we did some writers workshops where people took different scenes and rewrote them, or edited them, and then we came back together and kind of like synthesized some of the best pieces of things that people wrote. Like there were some characters that were invented along the way that really helped with certain transitions. Probably everybody's favorite character uh, in the book. His name is Fluffluff, and he's this little like secretary bird. Um,
Okay.
that yeah, so he was invented well after the first draft as a way to help introduce the character of Beakle to Chief Schnuckmuck and give him like a better reason to kind of go and meet with the chief. So things like that got added, and then
Mm-hmm.
from there, um, when we decided to get into illustration, there was a whole series of like selecting which, you know, spreads we really wanted to do. This is like a
Mm-hmm.
110 page, you know, children's book, so it's like a lot of illustrations for a, you know, yeah.
Sorry, 110-page children's book.
Um,
That's
well,
amazing.
I guess in the final rendering, it's now like 89. So yeah,
I
it
mean,
was
that's
at one
still
point
more than like 20. You know,
right,
that's an amazing amount of work.
right. So it's a
Sorry, anyhow, I interrupted you. Keep going.
yes, it's an amazing amount of work. It's, you know, four different chapters meant to be read, you know, every night
Mm-hmm.
with the
Okay.
family, and so it's kind of like an in between before they're quite ready for The Hobbit or, you know, Chronicles of Narnia. Beakle fits really well into that transition
Nice.
between, you know, kids book and chapter book. Um, but all that to say, yeah, it we went through this process of selecting all of the different spreads and trying to figure out like, you know, how are we going to lay out the book in order to, you know, make these spreads land exactly the right place. Um, and uh, and then once we did that, we did character design, a lot of different like renditions of like what the characters are going to look like, and then kind of figuring out where's the camera in this scene. You know, is it down below the Starstone, or is it above? You know, looking down over the group of people. I think like a filmmaker in a lot of ways. So that's kind of how I was approaching it. Um,
Nice.
so once we did that, we did a bunch of different beta tester like readings with families to figure out what was working, where their attention was, and we decided to put in a bunch of different. At the beginning of each chapter, there's like a whole kind of interaction that the parent will read with the kids to kind of go over the point of the book or to rehearse the last chapter, and to just
Mm-hmm.
have a playful kind of break with the kids. for their attention spans, things like that, that got added
Mhm.
along the way. So yeah.
Nice. And then I think you ran a Kickstarter for it, right?
Yeah, we finally, I don't know, after this is like way too much, but yeah, after about like 2 years of all of this, then we finally ran the Kickstarter, and that was really fun because marketing. I've spent a lot of time in my life like marketing capital campaigns for churches, and
Mhm.
it's not really tear jerky kind of stuff usually. So when you getting to market a kid's book to parents, you get to actually be a little bit like a kid. So I just came up with some really wacky ideas for how to market it, and made a really funny video that involved a, a very expensive cardboard bird costume, and a lot of different looks, different scenes, and all these different kind of wacky places introducing it. So
Mhm.
yeah, I would say it was pretty funny. I enjoyed it.
That's awesome. Can we take a couple minutes to talk about that? Think about marketing,
Hmm.
and maybe letting loose and marketing the book, because almost every author, myself included, that I've spoken to, when it comes to marketing their work or thinking about marketing a book, we freeze up and get terrified. We hate marketing, And this idea of actually having fun with it and maybe doing something unique or doing something different.
Yeah.
Uh, what ideas or recommendations would you have?
Oh my gosh, man. Yeah, I have so many. Um,
I mean, that's your day job, isn't it? So
yeah, right. Like, I mean, here we are talking to
not a
marketing
fair
guy about
question for right
marketing.
now.
Yeah, no, I would say that the first thing with all marketing that I always tell people to do is um, get very specific about the who, like who's this for and who's going to buy it. Um, I think that
Mhm.
as soon as we put on our marketing hats, generally we start to think in terms of demographics and big kind of
Mhm.
like summations of human beings. And then when we do that, it's almost completely impossible to empathize. And empathy is where play and where
Mhm.
creativity really comes in. So if when I ask somebody like, hey, who's this for? And they say something like, oh yeah, like families with kids ages like 3 to 4. And then you're like, yeah, that's like everybody. Like you don't actually have like a person in your head that you're able to like think of. You're like looking at, I'm like, I've got a number, and so there's very little
Mhm.
ways that you can play with that. So for me, I actually picked like three women who were moms that I thought were generally the kind of moms that would want to buy this. And then I just had a lot of
Mhm.
conversations with them about uh, what are you looking for in books, and what kind of pisses you off about what's out there right now. And um, took a lot of notes, and then pretty much the whole Kickstarter movie was me writing down almost word for word certain phrases that they said around their pain
Mhm.
points with children's books, but then just kind of coming up with really funny ways of delivering those lines. But yeah, a really good marketing campaign is all about empathy, where you've gotten into the really specifics of what people feel, what moms feel when they're buying books, and what they feel like is not out there. And if you've gotten them to let their hair down and say the things with the full kind of sarcasm and pain points that they would generally say, then you can like kind of regurgitate that in a way that makes them feel very known. And that's when people end up
Mhm.
like really resonating with the campaign. So yeah, that's how I
I
approached
think
it.
that's brilliant. I think that's what an amazing way to go. And then um, I would imagine out of that, your Storytime manifesto uh, came about.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so I think that uh, yeah, our like, I don't know, we treated this one, and this is definitely like the vibe of the book itself. Like, there's almost like the character of the narrator, in the book that I drew that from C.S. Lewis, and in some ways Tolkien too. Like, I really love how they have their asides to the audience and break the fourth wall a little bit. So there's like a lot of that kind of in the book.
Mhm.
And that's very much like in the marketing campaign too. But I think that um, we really treated it like, okay, if you're a Catholic parent of a large Catholic family, like you're really generally frustrated with the fact that at story time you have to choose between which one of your kids you're going to cater to, generally speaking,
Mhm.
and that frustration uh, is manifested in a lot of different ways. But it's kind of a funny thing when the little kid, when the smaller girl like brings the like pony or ballerina book, and the five older boys are just like, they do not want to do that, so they're they're completely lost, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and then you have the older kids, you decide to read the bigger book, and then the little kids are just running around distracting everybody, and you can't really get a good story time in anyway.
Mhm.
So that kind of frustration was one that we just like jumped on, and we made this whole like Kickstarter video about like, down with the establishment of children's books that only like makes books for like one age range. We're going to fix this and make books that appeal to like the full gambit of age ranges. So that was like the gist of the manifesto, if you will, but we just treated it playfully like it
Very
was a little
cool.
revolution. So yeah.
So Robin Hood ended up getting his revolution.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Storytime revolution, man. That's what's
How
up.
can That's awesome. Um, well, it's starting to wrap up. How can people get in touch with you? Where can they find more about Beakle?
Yeah. Beakle and the starstone.com is, you can find the website there where you can buy the book. If you want to check out the Kickstarter to kind of see how we did it, that is at beaklebook.com. We raised about 15K, which is not like, I mean, it's decent for a children's book, but it's not like amazing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked to have done like 60K or something like that, but it was enough to break even and get the book printed, so that was good. But yeah, you can, if you're an author and you're curious kind of about how we put it all together and like how we did the video and all that stuff, you can kind of look through that. Yeah, and then where to find me, if you're interested in marketing conversation, marketing help, just shooting around ideas, you can find us at sherwoodfellows.com.
Fantastic. I got to ask, now that you've done it once, do you have plans for a follow-up? Or maybe somebody else does?
Yeah, so right now, I have I'm working on a feature-length movie about Maximilian Kolbe, so that's like kind of taking up my creative bandwidth.
Wow.
But and maybe we can come back on in a couple of years and talk about that one. But yeah, it also depends on how the sales of the first book go. If we
Mm-hmm.
sell out and it ends up being a profitable endeavor, then yeah, then we'll definitely do another one. So yeah.
Amazing. That's brilliant. Well, just a second, I want to ask you your 1 minute message to authors everywhere. For those who are either listening or watching this interview, it's kind of a preview of the community that we're building in Catholic Author. It's the super friendly creative community for the modern Catholic author. Come and it's a place to give and get feedback, share your insights, your works in progress, and build a network of supportive friends. Plus, there's a whole lot more going on. So come and check us out. Join us, catholicauthor.us. Anthony, in wrapping up, if you had 1 minute to share a message to other Catholic authors, what would you want to say to them?
Yeah, just community. I think that you even leading in with like that's with your invitation to the community, I think that's for me been very key. Um, I just I think it's pretty normal for authors to sort of be lone wolves and go up on the mountain, come down with the tablets, and have an illustrator work on it or whatever. Go to the publisher, but
Right.
uh, a lot of the most influential stuff out there was written by some sort of like you trace the stuff, and the author was with enough, like there's a whole group of amazing authors that all kind of rose together. You think of the Inklings,
Mm-hmm.
but that was also true of many other authors that we know of today. And yeah, this is kind of me with the Catholic Creatives hat on, but the Italian Renaissance itself was really sparked by a very small group of people in
Mm-hmm.
Florence, and so it, you I think generally see excellence come in communities of artists more than you see it coming in the magical kind of um, lone ranger artist that just has inside of themselves this innate talent. I think the things that you learn from other authors and other writers or other creatives about the process, um, even just being influenced by their work as they're making it and workshopping their stuff and being workshopped, those sorts of things I would say are um, the most valuable experiences anybody can have as a creative. So pursue that. Don't be a lone ranger.